Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Today we're going to take a look at Cisco's RoomKit Pro codec. We're going to talk about its physical characteristics, what's new feature and functionality wise, and we're going to compare it to the SX80 codec that came before it as we go through. If you're new here, consider subscribing. With that being said, let's dive into it. The first thing you'll notice is the RoomKit Pro is the same width as the SX80. It is 19-inch, it is rack mountable, as well as comes with rubber feet on the bottom in case you deploy it on top of a cabinet or on a desktop. The RoomKit Pro is a little bit taller. It is 1.5 rack U's, whereas the SX80 was a single rack U. If we turn the systems on the end, you'll notice the RoomKit Pro is not as deep. This will give you additional flexibility when mounting it in a small AV cabinet, or if you have a lot of cabling that's attached to it. This keeps those HDMI cables from getting kinked, bent, and causing problems from that perspective. This also means that the RoomKit Pro, as long as you have that additional half a rack U, can be a pretty much bolt-in replacement for the SX80 as well. The first thing you'll notice about the back panel is a pretty substantial change in layout as well as the changes in connectors. So the SX80, you can see below here, the RoomKit Pro has changed pretty drastically from the video connection perspective. We have 3 HDMI outputs, 2 primaries that do 4K at 60 frames a second, and 1 which would be more your confidence monitor in the back of the room. That is also 4K at 30 frames per second. We have a number of HDMI inputs, both for cameras as well as content sharing. Up to 5 of those are possible. We remain pretty much the same from an audio perspective. There are 3 stereo speaker outputs that you can see on this side, and there are 8 microphone inputs on this side of as we come across the codec here. We still have GPIO in and outputs. There is a COM port. Instead of the COM port connector like we had before, we now have that on a more flexible Euroblock type connector as well. Something new would be the USB inputs. So USB inputs allow you to plug in something like a keyboard or a controller or remote control, something of that nature, and you can actually capture the inputs from a human interface device like that for use in macros. You may have seen some of my other videos where we talk about macros and give some examples. This is extended functionality, certainly optional of course, but adds more value to this endpoint overall. Another big complaint about the SX80 was the limit on network connectivity, right? Typically, if you had multiple cameras plus a Touch 10 and maybe some other devices, you would have to get a small 4-port switch or 6-port switch or something of that nature to put in the mix as well. Now, the problem with that was also a inexpensive switch with PoE is hard to come by. So all those issues have been taken care of with this RoomKit Pro codec. We obviously have our uplink port to the network from a connectivity perspective, but then there's a 4-port switch as well, and I'll call this a link local switch, if you will. These ports get or offer up DHCP addresses that are in a link local range, 169 dot whatever. These are for cameras as well as the Touch 10. There are 2 ports with PoE, so your Touch 10 does not need some type of PoE adapter, or you don't have to do other network customizations to get this thing online. The cameras plug in here, so you could plug this into your quad camera as well as to a P60 in the back of the room for presenter track type of capabilities. Likewise, you can still connect this to a more legacy P60 camera-based speaker track unit as well. Last but not least, I do want to point out 2 other connectors. As you can see here, these are actually antenna connectors to Wi-Fi enable this device as well. So this runs the latest Wi-Fi standards. If you're in a pinch and you can't get wired connectivity, you can certainly enable Wi-Fi on this endpoint to get it online and go from there. From a software perspective, there are some new feature enhancements as well. Now, of course, the RoomKit Pro will run essentially everything that the SX80 ran, the XAPI, macros, and the like. The nice thing is, though, is the RoomKit Pro now has the capacity and the processing horsepower for those new AI features. So, for instance, the Webex Assistant, which you may have seen in some of my other videos, the ability to ask the system, hey Webex, and then a function, hey Webex, start my meeting, that type of thing, is available on the RoomKit Pro. There's also some features such as the name labels, the facial recognition and name labels. So the ability for the endpoint to recognize an individual and put their name under them inside of the video feed to the far end. I want to thank you for watching. Stay tuned. I'm going to have some more in-depth look at this system, I'm sure, as well as other collaboration endpoints and collaboration technologies. So with that being said, have a good one. We will see you again soon.